Wow wow! Brother hey, the patriarch and the others are back. The sound of water flowing in the shallow depression, and a shout from Kanglin not far away. Sitting on the blue stone, Anmubai looked at his reflection in the water with black scales and a pair of golden vertical pupils. His mind was full of daze and trance. It has been more than a week since I came to this otherworldly world with magic and knights. Anmubai still feels dazed and incredulous about the fact that he actually transmigrated into a lizardman. It's not unacceptable for him to transcend. After all, he has nothing to worry about in his previous life, but he just transmigrated to become a non-human lizardman, and he often fell into self-doubt. System. Anmubai meditated in his heart, and a sky-blue data panel appeared on the water surface in front of him. I am the Great Lord Owner, Anmubai, Black Dragon Race, Lizardman, Dark Iron Race Level 9, Ordinary Level Physique, 9 Agility, 7 Soul, 5 Mission. As a future Great Lord, how can you not have a territory of your own? Go and rebel, boy! Become the chief of the Shallow Pit Lizardmen, own a piece of your own territory, and reward bloodline awakening. Lord! Anmubai looked at the system panel that appeared on the water, and whispered in her heart. This system panel with data and information displayed was called by Anmubai on the first day he came to this different world. However, Anmubai never started to complete the tasks shown on it. One is that he still hasn't adapted to his identity as a lizardman until now. The second is the patriarch of the Kunwaikang lizardmen. In addition to being the biological father of the lizardman Haihohu Anmubai has passed through in this life, he is also the current one among the Kunwaikang lizardmen. The only lizardman who has awakened his bloodline and entered the extraordinary rank. In the system's rating evaluation, although he is only rank 11, his strength is not low, and it is far beyond what Anmubai can match. Brother hey, why are you still sitting there? The patriarch and the others are back, let you go back quickly. In the jungle, a lizardman with light grey scales and a height of about 1.6 meters ran out and shouted anxiously at Anmubai. Anmubai looked at the lizardman with golden eyes with vertical pupils. Grayscale, stronger lizardman race, lizardman, dark iron level 6, ordinary level. Grayscales. Anmubai shouted, a smile appeared on his face with black scales growing, and he reached out and picked up the iron tree spear beside him. He got up and stepped on the shallow water of the puddle, walked towards the lizardman named Grayscale, and said with a smile. The patriarch and the others came back so soon. Did the big brother and the others catch the food? Brother hey, the patriarch and the others are injured, and big brother bloodline and the others haven't come back yet. Those gnolls attacked the patriarch. Grayscale's light grey face covered with fine scales, full of anxiety and anger, hurriedly replied to Anmubai who was approaching. Wow! The golden pupils in Anmubai's eyes shrank slightly, walking in the shallow water paused for a moment, and then quickly walked to Grayscale's side. He walked towards the gathering place of the lizard clan people in the shallow pit, and asked at the same time. Father is injured, is it serious? Have the 3 scales passed? It's over. The patriarch was besieged by those gnolls and was seriously injured. Green Fang and the others escorted them back. Grayscale replied resentfully, that body was much shorter than Anmubai, turned around and quickly followed behind him. When Anmubai heard this, the sturdy and powerful lizard tail stopped moving behind him, and clenched the iron tree spear in his hands, with a calm expression on his face, with grey scales on his face in less than a while. After passing through the jungle, he arrived at the gathering place of the lizard clan people in the shallow water pit. Said to be a gathering place, it was actually just a dozen thatched huts built with hay and trees. One of the larger thatched huts was already guarded by 12 lizards with ironwood spears. In the distance, there were some thin or young ones, and the lizardmen watched, but they did not dare to approach the area of the thatched hut. Big brother hey you! Brother hi why! Anmubai approached quickly with grey scales. Among the lizardmen surrounding the hut, there was a lizardman with an ironwood spear, and he immediately shouted to him. The other 11 lizardmen with ironwood spears also looked at Anmubai with admiration in their eyes, and exclaimed excitedly from their mouths. The lizardmen who shouted first were the 3 scales that Anmubai said. The color of the scales was messy, which did not meet the aesthetics of the lizardmen, but the level was outside the thatched hut. Except for Anmubai, the one with the highest level has a 7th level. With a smile on his face, Anmubai nodded to them, handed the ironwood spear to Grayscale, and then started to walk into the thatched hut by himself. Hiss! The smell of blood in the thatched cottage was very strong. There was a female lizard man who was dressing the 3 injured lizardmen in the room with herbs. This female lizardman is exactly Anmubai's biological mother, Molan. Anmubai watched, and looked at the 3 injured lizardmen in the room. Each of these 3 lizardmen is much stronger than the 3 scales outside the house, and the grey scales are much stronger, and the lowest level has an 8th level. The strongest one was even slightly taller than Anmubai, with a height of nearly 2 meters. Under the black scales mixed with blood, the muscles were bulging, full of strength. However, he is now covered with a lot of injuries, and he is the most seriously injured among the 3 lizardmen. His strong lizard tail and right claw have even been broken. And this lizardman is the Shallow Pit Lizardman clan, the patriarch with extraordinary strength, Anmubai's biological father of the lizardman Haihu, Suezu. Patriarch. Anmubai let out a shout of words. Shuezhu opened his eyes, his grey eyes were full of coldness and coercion, and he stared at Anmubai, who had golden vertical pupils and dark scales without a trace of mottle. He was silent and did not utter a word. This is just a simple thatched hut made of hay and trees, but it doesn't have much soundproofing ability. When Anmubai arrived, the 3 scales and the others were full of admiration and excited shouts, not too small. Anmubai lowered his head, the muscles under the black scales secretly tightened, and the cold and oppressive gaze of Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com Suezu made him feel the slightest killing intent. Hey you, immediately bring 3 scales, grey scales, and the others to rescue your eldest brother, Bloodline and the others. He will be the next patriarch of our Shallow Pit Lizard clan. After you rescued him, you supported him as the patriarch, put down the commander of the guards in the clan, and followed him to serve him. Shuezhu looked at Anmubai who lowered his head, and only then did he let out a cold command. This is to make me take the 3 scales, and the grey scales will die. Hearing this, Anmubai uttered a soft voice in his heart. His expression did not change. He raised his head to look at Suezu and the 2 lizardmen beside him, wrapped in herbs. The strength of each of the 3 of them is much stronger than that of Grayscale, Sanscale, and the others. It can be said that they can kill Grayscale and Sanscale very easily together. But even if it was like this, the 3 of Suezu were seriously injured before they could escape from the Hui clan. From this, it can be seen that the strength of the group of gnolls that attacked them was not simple. Anmubai can already see that, if he really carries the grey scales, the 3 scales and the others go to rescue the bloodlines, then even if he can rely on his own strength to escape by chance. When they came back, Grayscale, Sanscale and the others who were full of admiration for themselves, the lizardmen guards in the shallow pit, would definitely not have a few people left, or even wiped out all of them. Excluding dissidents, let's talk about the right. The lizardmen in this other world are not as brainless as they were written in the novels of the previous life. Anmubai pondered with a calm expression on his face, raised his head to look at the sight of the 3 of Shuezhu, a smile arose in his heart. Yes, Patriarch. Then he bowed his head to Suezu, turned around and walked out of the thatched cottage. Patriarch, do you really want Heian to take the grey scales and the others to Greenwind Plain? In the thatched cottage, as Anmubai left, a lizardman beside Suezu turned his head to look at him and made a questioning voice. Green Fang, the lizard clan people in the shallow pit only need 1 leader, and there can only be 1 leader. Suezu replied with a cold expression on Suezu's face. Boom! Using the stone scoop hammer to melt the ink scales of the herbs, his body paused for a moment, then picked up a few herbs from the side and put them in the stone scoop, and then hammered them. Scaled Claw, after Heiyu takes Sanscale and the others away, you can go to Leeward Ridge and let the bloodlines come back. Suezu turned his head and spoke to another lizardman beside him. This lizardman was the least injured among the three of them, named Scale Claw. Yes, Patriarch. Scaled Claw's body wrapped in herbs nodded. Brother He, shall we go to Lufanjiayuan to save Big Brother Suan and the others? Those steppe robbers, gnolls, I will kill them all severely in a while. Outside the thatched cottage, Grayscale and Sanscale looked at Anmubai who came out, and hurriedly walked towards him. Grayscale asked angrily, and handed Anmubai's ironwood spear to him. Anmubai stretched out his hand to take it, his golden eyes with vertical pupils glanced at Grayscale. He didn't say anything to answer, but looked at the dozen or so buildings in front of him. The thatched hut simply built with hay and trees, and the thin lizard people who are busy in the distance and dare not approach the area of the hut. I really don't want to go against it. Anmubai looked at it, his face with black thin scales growing a little disappointed, and let out an sigh in his heart. In fact, he didn't have much in his heart to think about Suezu right now, but he planned to wait for a while. His Xingxing adjusted, and his strength also broke through to the extraordinary level. Then go to seek the position of the leader of the shallow pit lizardmen. With the memories that he had assimilated with Heiyan, Anmubai was very clear that his own strength was only half a step away from awakening his bloodline and breaking through to the extraordinary level. Moreover, he also knew that in the memory of Heiyu, he planned to use the long-standing method of the lizard clan to succeed the patriarch after breaking through to the extraordinary level. He challenged the blood candle in public, proved his strength to the shallow pit lizardman, and succeeded as the head of the shallow pit lizardman. It's just that Suezu obviously doesn't want to follow the lizardman clan, the normal way of succeeding the clan leader, to succeed the clan leader of the shallow pit lizardman clan. As soon as the lizardmen of the team die, Grayscale, Sanscale, and the others, they will be completely useless in the shallow depression. The lizardmen who can support themselves will be completely useless even if they break through to the extraordinary level. Suezu's extraordinary strength, and the 8th level lizardman in the clan that he controls, it is impossible for him to take the position of the chief of the shallow pit lizardmen normally. No wonder the system uses the word rebellion. Anmubai thought softly in his heart, took his eyes back from the thin lizardman in the distance, looked at Grayscale and said softly. Grayscale, those gnolls dare to attack the patriarch, eldest brother, I will not let them go. But now the patriarch, Green Fang, and the others are seriously injured, and the big brother and the others haven't come back. The clan needs to be guarded by our shallow hollow lizardman guard. You bring Broken Claws, Flat Tails, and the others, to bring the inferior clansmen and our young clansmen into the cave, and they are not allowed to run around. Sanlin and I went to ask the patriarch how to set up defenses, and then took our shallow pit lizardman guards to rescue Big Brother Bloodstained. Yes, Brother He. There was a look of hesitation on Grayscale's face. Compared to guarding the clan, he wanted to follow Anmubai and go to Greenwind Plain to kill those gnolls who dared to attack them and the lizardmen. However, under the gaze of Anmu's witty gold vertical pupils, he still nodded, and then took 2 lizardmen with ironwood spears and ran towards the thin lizardman in the distance. Strong teeth, hollow teeth, pointed ears, bone scales, and flat angles. Gnolls are robbers in the Wanyi Mountains. They won't let any prey come to their mouths. You immediately go to the surrounding area to check if there are any gnolls coming. As soon as you find anything, come back immediately. Anmubai turned to look beside the thatched cottage, where there were still 9 lizardmen with spears in their hands, and spoke words. Yes, Big Brother Heiyu. The 5 lizardmen with ironwood spears stood up and answered Anmubai excitedly, and then ran to the outside of the shallow pit lizardman gathering place, filled with a sense of honor and mission. Big Brother Heihu. Sanscale looked at the lizardman who had been transferred away, with a puzzled look in his eyes, and asked Anmubai in a soft voice. Anmubai's gaze was directed towards the quiet thatched house, a smile appeared on his face with black thin scales, and he spoke softly. The Patriarch asked me to take you to death to pave the way for the bloodlines. If I guessed correctly, the bloodlines actually escaped with the Patriarch. We don't need to be rescued. When Sandscale and the remaining 4 lizardmen heard Anmuabai's words, the pupils in their eyes shrank involuntarily, and they clenched the ironwood spear in their hands. No words came out of his mouth. He waited for Anmuabai's arrangement, and he didn't have the slightest doubt about what he said in his heart. Anmuabai looked at him and nodded lightly in his heart. Heihao's memory did not deceive him. These 5 lizardmen were all people who had incomparable trust in him. Even if they directly say that they want to kill the blood candle and blood pattern, they will follow, especially the messy 3 scales, and they already have the idea of killing the blood pattern in their hearts and letting the Black Horn succeed the Patriarch. The lizard clan people in the shallow pit can only have one Patriarch, and that Patriarch can only be my black cockroach. After a while, I will make a move against the Patriarch. When you hear the sound, rush in and help me stop Green Fang and Scale Claw. Anmuabai's gaze turned to Sandscale, and Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com spoke to him. Brother He, let me go first, you can rest assured that I will kill the Patriarch. The words came out of Sanlin's mouth, and the eyes green as snakes were filled with murderous intent, and he clenched the ironwood spear in his hand. It's okay, although the Patriarch has extraordinary strength, your brother Heia's strength is not bad, not to mention that he was seriously injured. Anmuabai smiled on his black-scaled face, stretched out his right hand with sharp claws, patted Sandscale on the shoulder, and walked into the thatched hut with an ironwood spear. The atmosphere in the thatched cottage was quiet. Suezu and Liuya were already closing their eyes to heal their wounds. Only Anmuabai's biological mother Miscale was still dressing the 3 of them with herbs. They heard the sound of Anmuabai mobilizing Grayscale to leave earlier in the thatched cottage, but they didn't hear what Anmuabai had arranged. Sumolan thought that Anmuabai had already left, but when he saw the figure walking in, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and the small lizard's tail swayed hurriedly. His eyes kept winking anxiously, wanting Anmuabai to leave quickly. Anmuabai watched and did not stop walking, holding the ironwood spear in his hand and walking towards Suezu step by step. Hey, what are you doing back here? Why don't you take Sandscale and the others to save your elder brother? Suezu opened his eyes, and he felt a little dizzy and lethargic in his mind, but he didn't care. Instead, he gave Anmuabai a cold and murderous command. Patriarch, I came back to ask how to arrange the defense of the clan when I took Sanyan and the others to rescue the big brother. Anmuabai asked questions, but he did not stop when he approached Suezu. You don't need this. Hey! Suezu had an icy expression on his face, and he said cold words with murderous intent. After the blood marked and the others left, Anmuabai took 3 scales. He will rush back immediately, so why would he use it in the shallow pit where the lizard clan gathers to set up defenses? But before the words were finished, a sharp piercing sound suddenly sounded in this quiet thatched cottage. In the grey eyes of the blood candle, Anmuabai, who had already walked 1 meter in front of him, suddenly raised the ironwood spear and stabbed him straight. Suezu looked at the severely injured body, and immediately instinctively ducked aside, but for some reason, the feeling of dizziness and drowsiness in his head made his battle-hardened body feel a little hesitant to react. Pfft! The ironwood spear pierced the blood candle straight into the left chest where the herbs were wrapped. What? A cry of pain could not help but emanate from the mouth of the blood candle. An unexpected color appeared in Anmu's witty gold vertical pupil eyes, and he never thought that the sudden burst of thorns in his heart would actually stab a blood candle. While pulling out the ironwood spear, he condensed the data panel of the system and looked at the blood candle. Blood candle, extraordinary lizardman, seriously injured, poisoned race, lizardman, dark iron level, 11, extraordinary physique, 20 agility, 16 soul, 10 bloodline ability, cracked claw, bloodline boiling, crimson scales a kind of poison. and Muebai's eyes were filled with doubts. When he entered the thatched hut, he actually passed the system and observed the situation of the 3 lizardmen in Suezu and the others. It's just that the state at that time was only a serious injury, and there was no such a state of poison. Black Beetle! Green Fang and Scale Claw on the side shouted angrily, dragging their wounded body wrapped in herbal medicine, and rushing towards Muebai. But I don't know if it's because of the injury or something else, but the speed of rushing over is far less agile than it used to be. Muebai held the ironwood spear in his hand and looked at the two of them. Green Fang, strong lizardman, is seriously injured and poisonous. Race, lizardman, dark iron level, level 9, ordinary level. Scale Claw, strong lizardman, is seriously injured and poisonous. Level, level 8, ordinary level. It's all poison. Muebai looked suspiciously in his heart and uttered a whisper. Looking at the herbs wrapped around the 3 of them, he took the ironwood spear and attacked the lowest level Scale Claw. Pfft! Scaled Claw was the least injured among the 3 of Suezu, but he was still stabbed in the right shoulder by Muebai, and he felt dizzy and lethargic in his head. With one claw, he broke the ironwood spear, and then rushed towards Muebai. Bump! Muebai's sturdy and dark lizard tail stopped moving, and with the sound of breaking the air, it slapped the green tooth who was attacking from behind. The black scales were faint and bright, and he had a sturdy body that was 1.9 meters high. Instead of retreating, he opened his sharp claws and rushed towards Scaled Claws. Pfft! Scaled Claw's body had no resistance, and Muebai's claws broke his neck, and his claws scratched several shallow wounds in front of Muebai's chest. Touch! Sandscale and the others charged in with ironwood spears in their hands, with cold killing intent in their eyes, and without any words, they went straight to Muebai, and Shuezhu and the others rushed over. Cough! Hey, you bastard, I'm going to kill you! Suezu coughed, and recovered from Muebai's stab. His burly body with blood stripes stood up, his eyes were red with anger and murderous intent. All this from Muebai stabbing him to killing Scale Claw, Sandscale and the others rushed in. Although it looked long, it actually only took a moment. The small lizard tail with ink scales stopped moving, and looked at this sudden scene with both eyes, and was still a little bit unable to recover. 3 scales, cut off your fingers, hold on to Luya, and grey pupil, take my biological mother Miscale out first. Muebai uttered words in his mouth, looked at Emolin who was terrified, and rushed towards the blood cockroach. Chopsticks, I'll kill you! Suezu shouted angrily, and the 2-meter tall burly body instantly swelled in a circle, and all the wounds wrapped with herbs burst open. The only perfectly intact right claw swelled up and patted Muebai who was rushing like a dragon claw. Bump! Mue's body with white and black scales turned, dodging Suezu's blow, and the 1-meter-long lizard tail stopped moving and slapped Suezu's body. However, the scales on Suezu's body were red, and he was not injured at all. He raised his right foot and kicked Muebai, who turned around. Bump! Muebai twisted his upper body to block his hands in front of him, and his sturdy body was directly kicked away by Shuezhu, hitting the ground in the hut. Ha ha! Muebai hurriedly got up from the ground with some chest tightness. His hands were so painful that they seemed to be broken. Big Brother Black Scale! Watching this scene, 3 scales shouted loudly, holding an ironwood spear, followed by the figure of the other 2 lizardmen fighting with Green Fang, and was about to rush towards the blood candle. 3 scales, stop! Do you want to let Honkai and Pupeo die? Muebai let out a cry. Red Carries and Pupa were just lizardmen with level 6, Green Fang was injured and had a poisonous state. But it's not something that Honkai and Pupeo can compete with. Baby, you really think I'm seriously injured, and you can kill me with a few of you? How can you think of extraordinary strength? Suezu cursed with red eyes, and charged towards Muebai with incomparable killing intent, knowing that as long as Muebai was killed, the 3 scales and the others would never bring him any threat again. Ha ha! The strength of the extraordinary rank is really strong, so I want to win the position of the Patriarch even more. And Mubai laughed, looking at the blood candle rushing with his golden vertical pupils, arousing the power of the blood in his body. The robust body with black scales swelled slightly towards the blood candle. He Xian's own strength in his memory was only half a step away from awakening his bloodline to the extraordinary level, but it was not a delusion. Because he really felt the power of his own blood, and could use it simply, what he lacked was the awakening like a blood candle, and then possessing extraordinary power. Bump! And Mubai collided with the blood cockroach, looking at his broken body with golden vertical pupils, and started the most primitive and fight with the blood candle. The two sides kept attacking, using their sharp claws, feet, and tails to leave blood-red wounds on each other's body, each of which was rushing to kill each other, without leaving the slightest hand. Bump! 5 or 6 minutes later. Xuezhu once again kicked An Mubai, but it was not the same as the first time, and it directly kicked him away. The blood constantly flowed out of his body, making his kick no longer powerful. In his mind, he was dizzy and fell asleep, his swollen body shriveled and shrunk, and his aura was no longer as strong as before. Hu! And Mubai was breathing rapidly, his strong body with black scales growing all over his body was not intact, and blood was flowing everywhere. The body is weak and painful, and looking at it is no better than the blood candle. However, An Mu's witty gold eyes with vertical pupils looked at the blood candle whose body was no longer sluggish, but a smile appeared on his blood-stained face. Father, you lost. Hey, you can already use the power of blood. Xuezhu watched with a sullen look, full of blood but with a smile on An Mubai's face, with a complicated expression in his grey pupils, he asked. Who? An Mubai breathed rapidly in his mouth. He didn't say anything to answer. Instead, he adjusted the power of blood in his body, trying to squeeze out the last bit of strength. Kill the blood candle that also has no resistance. You won, and from now on you will be the patriarch of our shallow hollow lizardman. Xuezhu spoke with a complicated expression, and the already seriously injured body could no longer hold on, and fell directly to the ground. Boom! The power of blood in An Mubai's body, which was weak and exhausted, suddenly had a new vitality. Running in his body not only restored An Mubai's strength, but also restored his injured body a little. The blood vessels are awakened, the blood vessels in my body are awakened. An Mubai felt an incomparable surprise in his golden vertical pupils, and quickly called out his data panel. He didn't even notice that, with the awakening of his bloodline, under the attack of the three scales, Green Fang's body suddenly stiffened. Then Sanscale and the others found an opportunity, and were stabbed to death in this thatched hut by an ironwood spear. I am the great Lord Owner, An Mubai, Black Dragon Race, Lizardman, Dark Iron Race Level 10, Extraordinary Physique, 12 Agility, 10 Soul, 9 Bloodline Abilities, Food, Body, Claws Mission, own a piece of your own territory, it has been completed, and the bloodline will be awakened. Mission, Mutiny, the lizard people in the territory still don't know the death of their patriarch. The coming enemies may cause their mutiny. The boy who obtained the position of the leader of the lizardmen in the shallow pit through abnormal means, please comfort the clansmen in your territory as soon as possible. Reward, trails of the incoming enemy. The coming enemy. On An Mubai's face with black scales growing, looking at the new tasks refreshed on the system panel, the joy in his heart that he stepped into the extraordinary level because of the awakening of his bloodline was temporarily suppressed. He quickly thought about who the coming enemies are, the gnolls in Greenwind Plains, or the bloodline them. Brother Heiyu, your awakened bloodline has entered the extraordinary level. Sanscale walked over with the blood-stained ironwood spear in his hands, with a look of surprise in his eyes. An Mubai had a faint coercive aura towards them, and asked questions from his mouth. An Mubai thought about the coming enemy in his heart, nodded to Sanscale, then looked at the red carries whose faces were also full of excitement and joy, and said. 3 Scales, you go to tell Grayscale to let them bring the clansmen over quickly. Hung Kai, you go to inform Leto and they come back quickly. The gnolls who colluded with the Green Wind Plane attacked the Patriarch, and Green Fang and Scale Claw rebelled and killed the Patriarch. Do you understand? The expressions on the faces of Sanscale and Hung Kai were stunned for a moment, and they looked at the blood candle, the Scale Claw, and the green teeth killed by and Mubai in the room. They were the wisdom of the lizard people, and some were very confused by and Mubai. The purpose of saying this. However, he nodded without asking any questions, and then ran towards the outside of the thatched hut. Hong Kai kept murmuring as he ran. Bloodstripe colluded with the Gnoll, Green Fang, and Scale Claw rebelled and killed the Patriarch. And Mubai's eyes looked at the 2 figures running away, and towards the remaining grey pupils and pupas in the room. After sending Miscale out of the thatched hut, Grey Tong rushed back, besieged and killed Green Fang with Sanscale and the others. Hui Tong, you should take good care of my biological mother Emolin, and don't allow her to come into contact with any of the clan members. Pupa, go and carry the food stored in the clan. And Mubai then issued the commanding words. Grey Tong and Pu Claw nodded and quickly turned around and walked out of the thatched cottage, which smelled more bloody. Is the poisoning of the blood candles caused by ink scales? And Mubai retracted his gaze and looked at the dead blood candle in the room, the 3 of them, and let out a soft whisper. Lizardman's blood relationship is actually very weak. After all, lizardmen are oviparous, they can lay eggs twice a year, and there are at least 5 or 6 eggs each time. So what kind of blood kinship would there be, not to mention that the lizardmen are still cold-blooded creatures, and the hatching of eggs is not much different from that of crocodiles. In Mubai's memory, the black cockroach hatched from the egg, and after spending only a month with Miscale, he was driven away, and then he lived alone in the shallow hole where the lizard people gathered, looking for food to survive. When Mubai entered the thatched cottage twice, he never greeted Emolin or showed any sign of closeness. Whether it's under the ink scales or not, the first thing I do now is to recover my injuries and guard against the coming enemy. And Mubai shook his head lightly. The lizard tail with shattered scales stopped moving, walked to the side, sat down, and recalled his data panel again. 3 extraordinary abilities of the awakening of the blood vessels. Glutinous food can speed up the phagocytosis and digestion of food, restore one's own injuries, and absorb more nutrients from food to support one's body. It is an auxiliary extraordinary ability that is not activated by the energy of blood. Purpa brought the food stored in the clan, and he could use the food to speed up the recovery of his injuries. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. At the same time, the body is also a strengthening, the extraordinary ability of one's own physical quality, and the overall value of the body will be temporarily improved after the power of blood is activated. Although it is not as strong as the blood vessels of the blood candle, it has the ability to improve the recovery of physical injuries, and there will be toxins in the minions. Add a lot of attack methods. And Mubai looked at the system panel, the 3 extraordinary abilities he possessed after the awakening of his bloodline. The power of the bloodline in his body revolved, and he used his body. Kakaka. And Mubai's body has grown a little bit, and at the same time, the minions have become a bit sharper, and the dim light on it is bright, and it is full of not weak toxins at first glance. The scales on his body shattered and the wounds healed faster. The clansman of the shallow pit, the blood candle patriarch is dead. Green Fang and Scale Claw, the 2 damned guys, attacked the blood candle patriarch when he was injured. The blood candle patriarch told me before his death that it was the robber gnolls who colluded with Lufanjai Yuan to attack him. Now he has brought those robber gnolls to our Kyunwakang clan. I killed the 2 rebellious guys, Green Fang and Scale Claw, and awakened the bloodline to enter the extraordinary level. The patriarch has passed the clan to me. Now my clansmen, take up your weapons, and I will lead you to protect our homeland on behalf of you, kill the traitor of the bloodline, and avenge the blood candle patriarch. 15 minutes later, in the open space outside the thatched cottage. And Mubai, running his awakened bloodline, looked at the shallow pit lizards gathered in front of him in the sunset, and shouted resentful words to them. Ho ho! The lizard people gathered in front of the thatched cottage let out an angry and messy roar. With their thin and short bodies, they couldn't have any doubts about what An Mubai said. All I know is that Suezu was killed, and Mubai's awakened bloodline took over the position of the patriarch of the Lizardman clan in the shallow pit, and the bloodline brought those robbers and gnolls to kill them. It's done. An Mubai, whose body had not fully recovered from his injuries, looked at the lizard people who were shouting in anger, and whispered in his heart. Looking to the side, the 3 scales holding the ironwood spear and the others said, "Grey scales, claws, and red carries, go and take out the food stored in the clan, let the clan people have a good meal, and wait for the blood-stained traitor and those gnolls to arrive. I want them to understand that we shallow pit lizardmen are not easy to mess with." Ho ho! The lizard people gathered outside the thatched cottage roared even louder. Pupeo, Hung Kai, and the others walked in without hesitation. The food was stored and transported into the thatched hut. Only Grayscale's complexion paused for a moment. He seemed to want to ask An Mubai about something, but looking at An Mubai's strong body that was still hurting him, he turned around and followed Pupa and the others into the thatched hut where food was stored. "Brother Heiyu, did the bloodline and the others really rebel? I seem to have seen them when I came back." He was in charge of guarding lizard teeth that the gnolls might arrive outside the shallow pit lizard clan gathering place. He walked over to An Mubai and asked questions. "Where are they?" An Mu's witty gold vertical pupils shrank slightly, and he asked questions, and at the same time he called out his own data panel. "Lewind Ridge." Without the slightest hesitation, Lai Teeth said where he had seen them with blood marks. An Mubai heard that on his system panel, the words that showed the mutiny mission changed, and it turned into the trail of the enemy who had completed and rewarded him. At the same time, a new task word was born. Mission, Hidden Danger, young man who just became a lord, although you passed lies, enemies and food, you comforted the clansmen in your territory. But for you who just successfully rebelled, the hidden dangers have not been resolved. You need to show your powerful strength to the coming enemies to eliminate the hidden dangers. Let them understand who is the leader of the shallow pit lizardmen, and reward 3 strong lizardmen. The upcoming enemy is really the bloodline and them. It seems that they really escaped with the blood candle. It's just that 3 strong lizardmen are rewarded. What's going on? An Mubai looked at the new task that appeared on the system panel, and whispered something thoughtful in his heart, then looked at Sanscale and said, 3 scales, you bring Fierce Tooth and Grey Scales to protect the clan's land. I'll go take a look. If those gnolls come along with the traitor bloodline, let the clansmen prepare for battle." After speaking, An Mubai's sturdy lizard tail stopped, turned around and ran towards the direction of Leeward Ridge. Leeward Ridge is not that far away from the lizard clan gathering place in the shallow depression, and it can even be said that it belongs to the territory of the lizard clan in the shallow depression. "Broken Tail, how's the situation in the clan? Father hasn't sent someone to tell us to go back. Hasn't that taken away with him yet?" In the cave that looked a little dark because of the setting sun, a lizardman with a height of about 1.9 meters and with blood-stained scales sent out an anger towards a lizardman who had just returned from the cave and had a broken tail. Voice questioning. In this small dead cave, in addition to the 2 lizardmen, there were also 3 other lizardmen sitting in the cave with anger. There are more or less injuries on their bodies that have been simply dealt with. I don't know. When I first went out, I saw the guy with Lietooth running through the woods. They were all people with black scales. I think I received an order from the Patriarch to return to the clan and go to Greenwind Plain with Haihwai. The broken-tailed lizardman spoke. He was the broken-tailed tail Leto said, and the sturdy lizardman with blood marks was An Mubai's eldest brother with blood marks. Forget it, it doesn't matter, let's go back, isn't it just a few bastards? If my father didn't let me, I would have killed the little Heiyu. Swoon said resentful words, and the lizard tail with blood marks behind it stopped moving. The strong body that was somewhat similar to Suez started to walk towards the entrance of the cave. The docked tail in the cave, and the other 3 lizardmen saw him like this, and got up and followed him out of the mountain. It's just that just after the mountain movement, the 5 lizardmen of the bloodline stopped walking. Looking at a black-scaled lizardman in front of him who was injured, but 2 meters tall and with golden vertical pupils, there was a crisis in his heart. He was uneasy, and the instinct to kneel arose. This is the bloodline awakened lizardman, the coercion of ordinary lizardmen. The blood pattern colluded with the Greenwind original knoll to attack the Blood Candle Patriarch, causing the Blood Candle Patriarch to be seriously injured, and then instructing the Green Teeth, Kanshu www.ganshu.com scale claw to kill the Blood Candle Patriarch. Now that I have been passed down by the Blood Candle Patriarch, I am the new Patriarch of the Shallow Pit Lizardmen. You still won't take down the traitor Blood Vein. Unmu's witty gold vertical pupils looked at the 5 blood-marked people who came out of the cave, and uttered cold words. The Blood Candle Patriarch is dead. The eyes of the 5 people in Suezu looked uneasy, and when they heard Unmubai's coercive words, their minds fell into a blank moment, and the words were panicked on their faces. For a while, there were signs of panic like fleeing like a kobold. Bump! Unmubai's legs with claws exerted force, and his body rushed straight towards the blood pattern. His right claw swelled like a dragon's claw and slapped the blood-patterned lizard head. Crack! Bloodwind's strength is not low, and he is also a strong lizardman of the 9th level. Although he is in a panic, he can feel the right paw that Unmubai slapped. However, he quickly raised his hands to block Unmubai's shot, but even though he blocked it, those strong hands with scales growing. But it was straight on Unmubai's claw, and the shot broke, and the strong figure flew upside down and smashed onto the mountain wall by the entrance of the cave, with blood gushing out of his mouth. Run with the bloodlines, the black cockroach has awakened its bloodline and stepped into the extraordinary. Duantai opened his body, hugged Unmubai and shouted at Swuan, his claws clasped tightly into Unmubai's black scales. Cough cough. Blood gushed out of Swuan's mouth, struggling to stand up, then without looking at Unmubai and Broken Claw, he panicked and ran straight to the jungle in the distance. Snapped! Unmubai's sturdy lizard tail stopped moving, and slapped the body of the broken tail, and her body tried to struggle out from the embrace of the broken tail. However, the strength of the docked tail is not low, and he is also a strong lizardman of the 9th level. Although Unmubai has awakened his bloodline and stepped into the supernatural, his injuries from fighting with the blood candles have not yet fully recovered. He had used the body to recover from his injuries in the thatched hut. In fact, his current strength has not recovered, or he would not have told Swuan and the others that the blood cockroach was dead, nor would he just use split claws to attack Swuan. Wow wow! Bloodmark's escape speed was very fast, and in less than a moment, the figure disappeared into the jungle. You wanna die? Unmubai's muscles were tensed, and anger appeared in his golden vertical pupils. The thick lizard tail wrapped directly around the neck of the broken tail, and then tightened it forcefully. Cough cough! An unpleasant coughing sound came from Duoi's mouth, and the hands that embraced Unmubai couldn't help but loosen up a bit. Unmubai's body broke free, and his right claw, like a dragon's claw, slapped the head of the lizard with a broken tail. Snapped! A crisp sound sounded, and the lizard head on the neck of the broken tail was like a watermelon, and it shattered directly. Bump! Unmubai loosened the lizard tail that wrapped around her broken neck, her blood-stained face looked at the jungle where the bloodlines escaped and disappeared, and looked at the 3 remaining lizardmen beside her. Karto, Saw Scale, Iron Fang, meet the Patriarch. These 3 lizardmen, who were also strong lizardmen in the display of Unmubai's system, looked at Unmubai's icy golden vertical pupils. And the ground becomes a headless corpse, and the blood is constantly flowing out of the docked tail. With a flustered expression on his face, he knelt down directly towards Unmubai, and uttered the words of surrender. Unmu watched with his witty gold vertical pupils, the thick lizard tail swayed gently behind him, the afterglow of the setting sun disappeared behind him, ushering in darkness. Strong Lizardman, the trail of the coming enemy. Except for the awakening bloodline, it seems that these are not directly given to me by the system. If I didn't appease the Lizardmen in the clan before, or I didn't have this big lord system. Will you still get these? At night, the shallow hole where the lizard clan gathers. And Mubai sat cross-legged in the thatched hut where Suezu and Liuya were dead. He looked at his system panel, and there was doubt in his golden vertical pupils, and he whispered. At sunset, after appeasing the people in the clan, the traces of the bloodlines were learned from Liuya's mouth. And Mubai actually had some doubts and thoughts in his heart. So Cai rushed to Lewind Ridge alone, and even planned to kill Swuan alone at first. Let's see if there will be any changes, but in the end, what I get is only 3 strong lizardmen who are rewarded by the system. Shido, Sazkale, and Iron Fang, among them, Sazkale and Iron Fang are all 8th level lizardmen, except for Karto, which is level 9. This is a fixed number, or is it the power of the system? And Mubai whispered and shook his head lightly, no longer thinking about this issue, but looked at the system panel. After the hidden danger was completed, a new task was refreshed. Task: Territory Inspection. As a new lord who has successfully rebelled, how can he not inspect his territory and establish his prestige among the lizardmen in the shallow pit? Reward: Mutated Lizardman Cubs. A mutant lizardman cub. And Mubai had no eyebrows, only black scaly eyebrows wrinkled slightly. In fact, it was already past the egg-laying and incubation period of the lizardman. Otherwise, it was built mainly for a dozen or so thatched huts for hatching lizardman eggs, and there would be no lizardman eggs at all, let alone any newly hatched lizardman cubs. If there are really any mutant lizardman cubs, and I haven't seen them before, then there are only shallow depressions and swamp areas where the inferior lizardmen live. And Mubai murmured thoughtfully, glanced at the darkness in the room, and started to walk outside the room. Lizardmen have their own group classification, just like a pack of wolves, there are high-level, medium, and low-level lizardmen. And the division of this level is also very simple. The strong and strong are naturally the middle and upper lizardmen in the clan, and the thin and short are the lower lizardmen. Among them, the inferior lizardmen are the lizardmen with the lowest status among the lizardmen. They are not even inferior to the lizardman cubs, and they do not have the slightest qualification for food distribution in the clan. It can even be killed at will. The height is only about 1 meter thin. In an Mubai's system hierarchy, there are only 2 or 3 levels. As for the guards such as Sandscale and Grayscale, they are medium-sized lizardmen among the shallow pit lizardmen. They have relatively strong bodies, and they are all around the 5th, 6th, and 7th levels. Can enjoy the distribution of food among the clan, as well as the choice of mates. Big brother hey you! Outside the house, Sanlin held an ironwood spear, looked at an Mubai who came out, and hurried over. Although it was already night, for the lizardmen who could also see things at night, it was no different from daytime. In fact, compared to the daytime, the lizardmen prefer to be active at night. Grayscale and the others have even gone. In the jungle outside the shallow pit where the lizardmen gather, Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com is prepared for the real Knoll attack, or other crises that may come at night. The 3 of Che To were sent by an Mubai to a jungle not far from the Greenwind Plain before they returned to the clan, and they had no worries that the 3 of them would run away. 3 scales, let's go to the shallow swamp. With a smile on his face, an Mubai nodded lightly to Sandscale, and with a smile, led him towards the shallow swamp. Wow wow! The shallow swamp is where the lizardmen mainly live. It is a small swamp, not very large, and you can enter it after passing through the thatched hut. Now there are already thin and small lizardmen with messy scales, and they are all low-level lizardmen with shallow depressions. Scattered around in the shallow swamp, the food that an Mubai sent out before was probably the most filling they had ever eaten, so they didn't rummage around as usual, everything in the shallow swamp can be eaten. Things. After seeing Anmubai and Sandscale walking in, he hurriedly knelt down on his thin and short body, expressing submission. While walking, Anmubai didn't pay much attention to these inferior lizardmen, but focused on the lizardman cubs who also lived in the shallow swamp. If these cubs can have enough food to eat, then after 3 years they can at least become the same as the 3 scales and become stronger middle-level lizardmen. With a level of about 5 or 6, it can be used as the initial combat power of the shallow pit lizardman. And those low-level lizardmen with thin, dwarf scales and colorless scales are actually useless to the shallow pit lizardman. Brother Heiyu, it seems that we haven't been together for a long time. It's a shallow swamp. Holding an ironwood spear in his hands, Sandscale followed Anmubai's side, looking at the inferior lizardman who knelt down and surrendered to them. A smile appeared on the scaly face. Anmubai turned his head to look at Sandscale, and nodded lightly with a smile on his face. He knew from the memory that he had assimilated with Haihui. Sandscale's parents are actually low-level lizardmen in the clan, so once Sandscale hatches from lizardman eggs, they live in shallow swamps. If it wasn't for Big Brother Haihui at that time, I might have died in the mouth of that mud snake. During the 3 years of my childhood, I was not Big Brother Haihui, and he always took me to find food. Now I'm afraid it's the same with the 3 scales. A member of the inferior clan in this clan, without any strong body, was abandoned by the clan when the clan's food was in crisis. With a smile on Sandscale's face, he looked at the water and trees in the surrounding shallow swamps. These were all traces of him and the black cockroach, who had been looking for food. Lizardmen don't have the habit of raising young. Unless they have enough food, they will raise them, but they won't last long. At that time, I also needed your help and Hui Tong's help. After all, the shallow swamp is still dangerous for us who have just hatched. Anmubai whispered softly, and he knew from his memory that Hayscale rescued Grayscale and brought them with grey eyes to find food. In fact, the more important thing is to protect oneself. Although the shallow swamp is where the shallow lizards mainly live, the environment in it is for the newly hatched lizardman cubs. It's not very safe. In addition to the mud snakes mentioned in the mouth of the grey scales, there is also a grey catfish, and even birds that fly in the sky, will prey on the lizardman cubs. Sometimes some mad lizardmen will prey on lizardman young, or dig out the eggs laid by other lizardmen to eat. At that time, the black scales would gather the 3 scales, and they would spend the 3 years of growth together, the most important 3 years for the lizardman cubs. Whoa! There was a slight sound of water in a bush not far from Anmubai and the others. A mud snake with the thickness of an arm quietly swam out of it. Judging from its bulging belly, it was obvious that it had swallowed a lizardman egg, or even a lizardman cub. Pfft! The ironwood spear in Sandscale's hand stabbed out quickly, piercing the mud snake's head in one fell swoop, then picked it out of the water, and looked at the snake's body, which was twisting the thickness of its arms. Brother Hey, we are really lucky today. A mud snake this big was enough for us to eat at least before, haha. There was a smile on Sandscale's face. She turned her head to look at Anmubai and laughed. I don't think so. Maybe it hasn't hatched yet, or it was eaten by some beast. Anmu looked at the white and black scales with a smile on his face, smiled and nodded at the 3 scales, and looked suspiciously at the surrounding soil slopes and grasses. At this time, he and Sandscale had almost finished walking through the shallow swamp, but they did not see any lizardman cubs rewarded by the system. Eating so bloated, let me see what exactly you ate. With a smile on Sandscale's face, he inserted the ironwood spear in his hand into the water, then straightened the mud snake with one hand, and stretched out a sharp claws on the belly of the mud snake with the other. Pfft! The internal organs in the mud snake's stomach, a white-like egg but with slender limbs, and a small lizard tail fell into the water. This is a lizardman cub. Anmubai watched, and in the system data information panel condensed in front of him, the data information of this lizardman cub appeared. In order to find the mutant lizardman cubs rewarded by the system, after Anmubai entered the shallow swamp, he kept opening the system's data information panel. Mutant Lizardman Cub Race, Lizardman, Dark Iron Level, 0 Physique, 0 Agility, 0 Soul, 9 Damn it, this dog system, and the rewarded Lizardman Cubs don't care about life or death. And Mubai cursed loudly in his heart, and quickly bent down to catch the mutant Lizardman Cub. The Lizardman Cub was covered in snow-white scales, but it was the size of a puppy, with a big head and a small body. Looking at it, it was a completely deformed Lizardman Cub. The whole body is not even half the size of the head, his eyes are closed and his body is icy cold. This dog system! And Mubai scolded again inwardly as he looked at it, and then hurriedly harnessed the power of his awakened bloodline, and carefully probed into the body of this mutant Lizardman Cub. Dong dong! The weak heartbeat in the Lizardman Cub's body was beating and not dead, and Mubai breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, I really ate one, the cub of our shallow pit Lizardman. Sandscale looked at it, and said a word to the mud snake, which was hanging on the ironwood spear, but was still twisting, and then turned to look at Mubai and asked. Brother Mubai, is this Lizardman Cub dead? Not yet, 3 scales, let's go back. Mubai shook his head lightly, carefully grabbed the mutant Lizardman Cub, and walked towards the thatched hut area. Hey, you reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Is this your child? After 5 or 6 minutes, Mescale was in the thatched hut guarded by Grey Eye. Emolin looked at the mutated Lizardman Cub with snow-white scales that Mubai handed over, and made a soft inquiry sound in his mouth. She is not the biological mother of Blood Mark. The lifespan of ordinary lizardmen is not very long, and generally they will not live past 10 years. When the cubs are just hatched, they are only the size of a puppy. They will grow into adulthood after 3 years, and they will reach their prime years after 2 years. At about 10 years old, it will enter into aging, and it will die after 5 years at most. However, among the ordinary lizardmen in the shallow pit, none of them have lived for more than 10 years, and the lizardmen with a strength level of 9th are mostly in their prime. Will die because of food, hunting, or other reasons? No. Mubai shook his head lightly, and put the mutated Lizardman Cub in Molin's hand. It's very difficult to save her life, and even if her body were saved, it would be very difficult for us to survive among our shallow pit lizardmen. Emolin made a voice. Although she is not the biological mother of Blood Mark, she has raised quite a few Lizardman cubs, and also has some knowledge of pharmacy. It must be saved. Musewit gold vertical pupils stared at Mescale, and made a firm voice, although the level of this mutant Lizardman cub was 0. The physique and agility are even less, but the soul index as high as 9 is something that Mubai has never seen before. You must know that he has awakened his bloodline and entered the extraordinary level, but his soul index is only 9 points. So how could you just give up this mutated Lizardman cub? Purpa, how much food is stored in our clan? On the second day, white fog rose in the shallow swamp. Grayscale, Pupa, and the others returned from the jungle outside the gathering place. Last night, the gnolls of Greenwind Plains did not attack. Mubai walked out of the thatched hut where Mescale was located, and asked Pupa. With the efforts of him and Molin last night, the Lizardman cub with all the white rims was finally rescued from the brink of death and opened a pair of pink eyes. It was a female lizardman, and Mubai named her Bai Chi. Big brother Halong has not much left. At most, we have enough food for 2 days. The stored food was originally prepared for the senior lizards and intermediate lizards in the clan. But there were too many lower-level lizardmen gathered from the clan last night. If Brother Grayscale hadn't driven them away in the end, I'm afraid the clan stored food. They will eat them all last night. Pupeo replied with a haggard expression. Well, go back and have a good rest, I have something to do tonight. Mubai nodded lightly, reached out and patted Puzuo's shoulder, turned and walked towards the thatched hut where Blood Candle and Green Fang died. Mission: the crisis of the Lizardman cubs, the inheritance of each race, and the prosperity and continuation of each territory are never a matter of one person or a group of people. The superior has a lord for a day. You have inspected your territory last night and saw the survival of the Lizardman cubs in your clan. It is full of crises, without the slightest guarantee of life. If you are not careful, it will become the ration of a beast. They are the future of your territory. Please plan an area where Lizardman cubs can hatch and survive safely. Reward: 3 low-level potions. 3 low-level potions. In the thatched hut, Anmubai looked at the big lord system panel and refreshed the task again, and uttered a soft voice in his mouth. My heart was throbbing with surprise, and I really wanted to complete this task immediately. In this extraordinary world where magic and dragons coexist, potion is a very special existence. It contains magic power and has various extraordinary effects. Whether it is the cultivation of magic, the cultivation of fighting spirit, or the awakening of blood, it is inseparable from the assistance of magic medicine. Although Anmubai has awakened his bloodline and stepped into the extraordinary level, the Lizardman bloodline is not a powerful bloodline, and the extraordinary level is not the apex of this world. There are also supernatural beings of the destruction order that can easily destroy a city and a family, and there are also supernatural beings of the overlord order that can completely set foot on the sky and the earth. The legendary giant dragons are extraordinary creatures in the hegemonic stage when they are adults, roaming the continent and the sky, and few creatures dare to provoke them. On top of that, there are even saints, legends, epics, and even gods. The supernatural lizardmen have a lifespan of only 30 years. They belong to the Black Iron race. There is no way to advance their cultivation, except to take potions. Let the power of one's bloodline continue to grow stronger and transform, so that the bloodline can be advanced, enhance one's own strength, and longevity. It's just that these 3 low-level potions are not good. Anmubai whispered and shook his head lightly, looking at the system panel, looking at the requirement to complete the task. How could he not be clear about the survival crisis of the Lizardman cubs in the shallow pit? After all, his current memory has been assimilated with the Black Hornet. It can be said that the Black Hornet is him, and he is also the Black Hornet. However, the survival crisis of the Lizardman cub is not so easy to solve, which will directly bring great changes to the shallow pit Lizardman. In severe cases, it may even lead to the extinction of the shallow pit Lizardman. The population development of a territory actually mainly depends on whether the territory's food is sufficient or not and how many people it can support. Suezu knows about the danger of Lizardman cubs living in shallow swamps, and all the Lizardmen in the shallow craters also know that, after all, they all came out of the shallow swamps. But no one has changed it. That's because the shallow pit Lizardman can only raise so many Lizardmen. The chances of Lizardman cubs surviving will increase, and the hatching chances of Lizardman eggs will increase, which will inevitably lead to a significant increase in the number of Lizardmen in shallow pits. Then what is faced is that there is not enough food to eat, and the Lizardmen in shallow depressions will not grow fully and become inferior Lizardmen. It's hard to see medium and high-class Lizardmen, let alone those who have awakened and entered the extraordinary. Anmubai frowned and looked at the task of Lizardman cub crisis on the system panel. This task actually faced the problem of food crisis for the Lizardmen in shallow pits. There is simply not enough food in the shallow depression to raise the Lizardmen in the shallow depression, otherwise there would not be so many inferior Lizardmen in the clan. Medium Lizardmen only have grey scales. Reading www.Yukanshu. There are a few of them in the 3 scales, and the first-class Lizardmen are now only the 3 of them, and only Anmubai is the only one who has entered the extraordinary awakening bloodline. If you want to complete the task of the Lizardman cub crisis, then the first thing is to solve the problem of the food crisis, otherwise there will be no food to eat. Even if they survive and grow, they will all be useless inferior Lizardmen, and instead will directly drag down the growth of other Lizardmen in the clan. Food: the Lizardmen don't have the habit of farming, and the Blood Candles have never had the idea of farming. They both use hunting or looting as the food source for the clan, but these two methods have too many uncertain factors, and they cannot form a stable and large food source at all. So in the future, I still have to arrange for the lizardmen in the shallow pit to grow food, or breed them. But whether it's planting or breeding, it takes time. For the shallow pits that are in desperate need of food, it cannot solve the current crisis. And most of the cubs in the clan are still hatched. It seems that now it is really only possible to start a war to reduce the consumption of the shallow pit lizards from the inside. And Mubai frowned and muttered, and looked at the meat strips in the room that Pupeo and the others brought in, and the dried fish stored food like this. When he asked how much food there was still in the Pupa clan, he actually had the idea of starting a war in his mind. This is the best way to quickly reduce the food consumption of a race, and it is also very common in the Wanyi Mountains, whenever the population of that race is overdeveloped. When the food in the clan is far from enough to support, they will start a war. Purpa, how much food is stored in our clan? In the early morning of the second day, a white fog appeared in the shallow swamp. Grayscale, Pupa, and the others returned from the jungle outside the gathering place, but the gnolls from Greenwind Plains did not attack last night. And Mubai walked out of the thatched hut where Mescale was located, and asked Pupa. With the efforts of him and Mescale last night, the mutant lizardman cub with white scales was finally rescued from the brink of death. However, her breath was still very weak. She opened a pair of pink eyes. It was a female lizardman, and Mubai named her Bai Chi, and temporarily stayed with Mescale to take care of it. Big brother Heilong has not much left. At most, we have enough food for 2 days. The stored food was originally prepared for the senior lizards and intermediate lizards in the clan. But there were too many lower-level lizardmen gathered from the clan last night. If Brother Grayscale hadn't driven them away in the end, I'm afraid the clan stored food. They will eat them all last night. Pupeo made an answer, looking a little haggard and tired. Is it enough for 2 days? And Mubai's brows furrowed slightly, and he reached out and patted Puzuo's shoulder. Okay, I see. Go back and have a good rest. I have something to do tonight. Yes, Big Brother Blackscale. Puzuo nodded towards and Mubai full of admiration and respect in his eyes, and walked towards the thatched hut where he and Huatong lived. There are only 2 days of food, and the Lizardman Cub survival crisis task refreshed by the system, how to complete it. And Mubai frowned slightly as he watched Pupeo leave to face the figure, and with a thought, he called out his system panel. Mission: the survival crisis of the Lizardman Cubs, the inheritance of each race, the prosperity and continuation of each territory, is never a matter of one person or a group of people. The new Lizardman Lord, you have already seen the crisis in the survival of the Lizardman Cubs in your clan. Without the slightest guarantee of life, if you are not careful, you will become the ration of some beast. They are the future of your territory. Please plan an area where Lizardman Cubs can hatch and survive safely. Reward: 3 low-level potions. 3 low-level potions. In an Muse-witty gold vertical pupils, there was a throbbing whisper, which was a low-level potion reward, the survival crisis mission of the Lizardman Cub. After Bai Chi was rescued last night, the system was refreshed. In this extraordinary world where magic and dragons coexist, potion is a very special existence. It contains magic power and has various extraordinary effects. Whether it is the cultivation of magic, the cultivation of fighting spirit, or the awakening of blood, it is inseparable from the assistance of magic medicine. Although Mubai has awakened his bloodline and stepped into the extraordinary level, the Lizardman bloodline is not a powerful bloodline, and the extraordinary level is not the apex of this world. There are also supernatural beings of the destruction order that can easily destroy a city and a family, and there are also supernatural beings of the Overlord order that can completely set foot on the sky and the earth. The legendary giant dragons are extraordinary creatures in the hegemonic stage when they are adults, roaming the continent and the sky, and few creatures dare to provoke them. On top of that, there are even saints, legends, epics, and even gods. The transcendent stage is just the beginning. The lizardmen are of the black iron race, and even if they awaken their bloodline and step into the extraordinary level, they only have a lifespan of 30 years. There is no way to advance in cultivation. Only by taking potions to make one's own lizardman's bloodline continuously stronger and transform, can the bloodline be advanced to enhance one's strength and longevity. It's just that these 3 low-level potions are not good. Anmubai whispered and shook his head lightly, looking at the system panel, looking at the requirement to complete the task. How could he not be clear about the survival crisis of the lizardman cubs in the shallow pit? After all, his current memory has been assimilated with the Black Hornet. It can be said that the Black Hornet is him, and he is also the Black Hornet. However, the survival crisis of this lizardman cub is not so easy to solve. The size of a territory's population actually mainly depends on how much food there is in the territory and how much population it can support. Suezu knows about the danger of lizardman cubs living in shallow swamps, and all the lizardmen in the shallow craters also know that, after all, they all came out of the shallow swamps. But no one has changed it. That's because the shallow depressions are now the source of food and can only raise so many lizardmen. The chance of lizardman cubs surviving will increase, and the hatching chance of lizardman eggs will increase, which will inevitably lead to a significant increase in the number of lizardmen in shallow pits. This will directly drag down the entire shallow pit lizard people, and even lead to the extinction of the clan. Anmubai frowned as he watched the task of lizardman cub survival crisis on the system panel. The essence of this task is actually the lack of food for the lizardmen in the shallow pits, and the problem of not being able to raise many lizardmen at all. The reason why there are so many inferior lizardmen in the shallow depression is that there is insufficient food. Most lizardman cubs do not have enough food to eat when they hatch. It leads to stunted growth and development, and can only become a thin and short low-level lizardman when he becomes an adult. In fact, the inferior lizardmen are not very useful to the lizardmen. On the contrary, they will greatly hinder the development of the lizardmen. Although they have no food distribution among the clan. However, it occupies the clan's territory for food, which will lead to a decrease in the food of the lizardman cubs in the clan, resulting in a new batch of lizardman cubs. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Without sufficient food to eat, they become inferior lizardmen with insufficient growth and development, forming a vicious circle. So if you want to complete the task of the survival crisis of the lizardman cubs, you must first solve the problem of insufficient food in the clan. Otherwise, if many lizardman cubs survive and grow, they will only be low-level lizardmen that are of little use. On the contrary, it will lead to the birth of intermediate-level lizardmen in the clan, and the probability of higher-level lizardmen will become smaller. And in the Wanyi Mountains, a group of lizardmen with only inferior lizardmen is completely unqualified to survive. Anmubai muttered in a low voice, got up and walked towards the thatched hut where the food was stored by the lizard clan. This thatched hut is not far from the thatched hut where Blood Candle and Green Fang died. Anmubai walked into it and saw that there was really not much food left, only some dried meat and fish. What Pupeo said can be eaten for 2 days, that is completely a meal a day for 2 days. At most, it can barely suffice for today's food. The sources of food are generally nothing more than planting, raising, hunting, plundering, and buying. Anmubai looked at the thatched hut, where there was only a little dried meat and fish left, her brows furrowed even more, and she whispered softly. Lizardmen are actually omnivorous creatures. Although they do not have the powerful stomach sacs of giant dragons, they can eat anything. However, there is no cultivation or breeding habit. All sources of food are hunting, searching, or plundering. Although Anmubai said that the gnolls of Greenwind Plains were robbers from the Wanyi Mountains, they were actually not bad as lizardmen. Purchase, this doesn't exist in the Wanyi Mountain Range, which is full of monsters and a restricted area for human beings. And the shallow pit lizardmen have nothing to exchange for food. Anmubai whispered softly, and with a strong body that was almost healed, he walked towards the door of the thatched cottage. He looked at the low-level lizard people who had started looking for food for another day in the shallow swamp. It takes time to plant and breed, and it doesn't apply to the shallow pits where most of the lizardman cubs have hatched, not to mention that the lizardmen in the shallow pits have no concept of planting and breeding at all. This needs to take them to change slowly in the future. And hunting or plundering is full of uncertainty and danger. Even if you are lucky enough to hunt a lot of prey every day, it is impossible to meet the needs of the shallow pit lizard clan's consumption now. So now if you want to reduce the consumption of food in the clan and have food to raise the lizardman cubs in the clan, then the only way is to start a war. And Mubi's sturdy lizard tail swayed behind him, and looked at the lower-level lizardman who could be seen everywhere in the shallow swamp, with a decision in his golden vertical pupils. War, this is not uncommon in the Wanyi Mountains. Food, territory, or the overpopulation of the clan, any place in the Wanyi Mountains, any race, will have wars for these reasons. This is a very good and very fast solution to the food crisis in the clan. No matter whether the war is lost or won, it will no longer be troubled by the food crisis. The lizardmen in the shallow pit have also launched a lot of wars. After all, the lizardmen are also a race that reproduces and grows fast, as Sanlin said last night. When the food in the clan is in crisis, the inferior lizardmen in the shallow pits will be discarded because of the war. But even if you want to start a war, you can't just go to consume the population of the clan. And Mubai pondered in his heart, then set off and walked towards the location of Sans Kale. In his heart, he already had a target suitable for the lizard clan people in the shallow pit to launch a war. A tribe of frogmen not far from the shallow depression. The frogman is also a black iron humanoid race in the Wanyi mountain range, but the overall intelligence and strength of the race are even lower than that of the lizardmen. The only thing better than the lizardmen is that the lizardmen can't keep up with the reproduction speed of making babies every day. It's no joke that 2 frogs can become a family in the Wanyi Mountains. And this is also the reason why frogmen can survive in the Wanyi Mountains, which is a forbidden area for humans, and they are everywhere. Big Brother Hey You! The figure of 3 scales was on a hillside on the edge of the shallow swamp, holding an ironwood spear in his hand, watching the situation around the lizardmen gathering place in the shallow depression. This is the highest hillside where the lizardmen gather in the shallow pit. Below it is the cave wherein Mubai let Grayscale bring the middle-level lizardmen and their lizardmen cubs into the cave yesterday. 3 scales, go to the green woods and call the 3 of them back, and then go to the black mud swamp. Look at the frogman group in the black mud swamp, how many adult frogmen there are. And Mubai's figure came up from the hillside, looked at Sanskale who was calling him, walked to him with a smile on his face, and spoke words. Black mud swamp. The smile on the face with 3 scales and thin scales was stunned for a moment. Looking at Mubai's line of sight, he made a soft question. He is no stranger to the frogmen in the black mud swamp. It can be said that the wars of the shallow pit lizardmen are mostly launched against the frogmen in the black mud swamp. However, although the overall strength of the lizardmen in the shallow pit is stronger than that of the frogmen in the black mud swamp, their numbers are always far inferior to the other. Therefore, except for the large number of low-level lizardmen in the clan, they usually don't pay attention to the frogman clan in the black mud swamp. There is not much food stored in the clan, at most it is enough to eat today. There are a lot of lower-level lizardmen in the clan, and they have begun to compress the growth of the cubs in the clan. And Mubai nodded, the sturdy lizard tail swayed behind him, and looked at the shallow swamp under the hillside. When the food in the clan faces a crisis, give up the weak and old clan members in the clan, and free up more food to raise the cubs in the clan, and the more powerful clan members. This is the way of survival of most races in the Wanyi Mountains. Although it looks very cold-blooded, it is the reason why most races can survive in the Wanyi Mountains. Yes, Big Brother Hey You! 3 scales gaze followed to the shallow swamp, and there were nearly 200 low-level lizardmen scattered in search of food. There was no hesitation or unbearable in his eyes, he bowed to Mubai, turned and ran down the hillside. The lower-level lizardmen are more harmful than beneficial to the entire shallow pit lizardmen. They occupy the space where most of the cubs live. But there is no room for growth and combat power. In the past, Suezu was the patriarch, and he couldn't make any changes. Now that he is tied to the shallow pit lizardman, he has a lord system. Then we can't let the lizardman in the shallow pit be like this. After all, 4 or 5 low-level lizardmen may not be able to defeat a middle-level lizardman like the 3-scaled, stubborn claws. Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com. This time, I have used the war against the frogmen in the Black Mud Swamp to eliminate some inferior lizardmen from the clan, and I will try to stop the formation of the inferior lizardmen in the shallow pit, and follow the route of elite soldiers. Anmubi's sturdy lizard tail moved gently behind him, looking at the lower-level lizardmen in the shallow swamp, who were snatching food with the lizardmen cubs, or searching for food everywhere. The sight in the eyes of the golden vertical pupils looked towards the entrance of a rather large cave at the bottom of the hillside where he was standing. And the formation of the lower-level lizardmen in shallow depressions is ultimately the lizardmen in shallow depressions, and they have no control over laying eggs and hatching lizardmen cubs. As long as it's the spawning season, no matter whether the superior lizardman, the intermediate lizardman, or the inferior lizardman will lay eggs, they won't care about the food in the thinking clan, and they can't raise too many lizardmen at all. This has led to the lower-level lizardman becoming the unavoidable tail of the shallow pit lizardman, although it will temporarily decrease after the war. But it won't take long for it to relapse. After all, although the lizardmen are not as reproductive as frogmen, they have 2 births a year, with 5 to 6 eggs in each birth, and it only takes 3 years from hatching to adulthood. Time. Unmu's witty gold vertical pupils looked at the entrance of the cave, not much in his mind. This time, he brought the lizardmen in the shallow frog pit to attack the frogmen in the black mud swamp. It will lead to too many casualties for the lizardmen in the shallow pits, and then the fear of the danger of genocide cannot be overcome. There are only 2 types of races that can survive in the Wanyi Mountains. One is the strong hunter, and the other is weaker but has the ability to reproduce and grow quickly. As long as it is not completely wiped out, it can quickly reproduce and survive. And the lizardmen are the latter.